So let's take a look at what factions are doing well or badly in Warhammer 40k right now, rounding up how the armies have done on the tournament scene in the past weekend, with army play rates, faction win rates, and which armies are most consistently making it all the way to win events. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're taking a look at some Warhammer 40k army performance numbers once again, rounding up another week's worth of tournament data, adding it into what we've learned so far after the big Warhammer 40k balance update, and perhaps getting a very slightly clearer picture as to which factions are standing on top and which are struggling in the current 40k meta. The past 2 weeks have given us a rather enormous amount of Warhammer 40k game data. The week before we had the 1,000 player London Grand Tournament, and in the past week we've had the Las Vegas Open, which wasn't quite as big, but the average player played more games in that, 6 rather than 5, and there are 2 other 100 plus player tournaments and a lot of other events besides. Overall looks like another 7,000 or so games of Warhammer 40k were played, to give us some more insights as to what was doing well. For this video I went through best coast pairings and added up player numbers and win percentages for the past week. It is still fairly early post the balance update, but now the majority of armies have somewhere between around 400 or 1,000 games on record. It's a bit more reliable than lower numbers and won't be quite as dependent on any one player doing well or badly. And then with that I thought we'd take a look at a few metrics, which armies people are choosing to play and put on the table, faction win rates both for this week, and then adding them into the bigger picture, which armies seem to be doing well and actually winning tournaments, both in total and per player. Taking a look at a few detachments that seem to be doing rather well in the last update, and then take a look through 5 strong army lists that did well at the tops of the biggest tournaments besides the Las Vegas Open. I covered that one in the previous video. As ever, loads to talk about, so let's jump straight in. First up, let's talk about armies being played the most. It seems that Space Marines were the most played faction last weekend, taking over from World Eaters the week before. Maybe a few more people being tempted to have a go with the Raven Guard Shadow Mark Talon. Otherwise, a few player rates were a bit higher or lower than previously. The Tyranids maybe a little bit higher than they've been in a couple of previous weeks, as were the Black Templars. Maybe a few of the standings might be representative of which armies people wanted to take to the Las Vegas Open meta versus the London Grand Tournament, but week on week it's probably going to be quite random as well. Other popular armies at the moment are the Death Guard, Aeldari, Custodes, Tyranids and Necrons, and Orcs have been played a fair bit more as well after a few boosts in the terms of the points department. Here's the lower end of the table with the armies being played the least this week. It looks like the Emperor's Children, Thousand Sons, Grey Knights, Genestealer Cults, Drukhari and Deathwatch made up the bottom of the table, and of course the Imperial Agents below that. If anything, Deathwatch are gaining on their nearest rivals though. They were played in tiny amounts for the first 2 weeks after the balance updates, but they do seem rather strong. Maybe a few more people are deciding to pick them up as a result. Otherwise, maybe feels like Admech and the Sisters of Battle are being played just a touch more than normal. Demons don't seem to have been played so much last week, at least relative to how many people were playing them in times past. Adding those into the ongoing totals, since the balance pass it does look like that means Space Marines are overall the most played army. They're pretty much on an even tie with World Eaters. It is interesting to see them so high still. They usually tend to be quite niche, but people are quite enjoying the changes to 8-bound and putting lots of Khorne Berserkers on the table, it would seem. Otherwise Orcs and Tyranids rose up a bit relative to where they've been in previous weeks. Here's the lower end of the table, a few factions shifting around here a bit. Admech seem to be rising up maybe most notably, and Thousand Sons, Emperor's Children and Grey Knights drop back a touch. Next up, let's take a look at the weekly win rates. Bear in mind that these are less reliable or interesting than the rolling average of them, as they just have lots of random variance, just literally due to chance. So getting too excited about any one number being a little bit higher or lower than normal just isn't really that intelligent from these numbers. I take them in context of the overall since data slate ones. Having said that though, it looks like the Emperor's Children and Drukhari had a particularly bad last weekend. Both of those are based on really quite low player numbers though, so more chance that that's a bit of bad luck than anything else. The Drukhari numbers don't really mean too much as well given their codexes coming out. Otherwise interesting to see the Imperial Knights towards the lower end as well at 44%. Not really a great showing for week 2 after their codex, though admittedly they did far better in week 1. Moving up to the armies that did around about 50% wins round this week. Tyranids did a bit better than they'd done it in the previous couple of weeks since the balance pass. Looks like players won around about half their games, and it's kind of similar for the World Eaters and the Space Marines as well, both on 50% as well. So the 2 most popular factions haven't exactly overperformed for the average player this week. Demons, Custodians and Necrons did over 50%. Then for the top armies by win rate this week, the Admech placed top once again. They're up on a big 61% it seems. Certainly seems that with the advent of Belisarius Caul's big rerolls, the Cog Boys have risen to be one of the scariest armies in the game by every metric, and this is sustained and consistent with the previous weeks that we've had. Otherwise not really too surprising to see the Adeptus Sororitas, Deathwatch and Aeldari here. It looks like Thousand Sons with a small number of players actually did rather well on average, getting a 56% win rate, and the Tau Empire up here too on 54%. Imperial Agents are here as well, though given how few players they are, that's pretty much random. Here are those numbers on a graph, just to visualise it a little better for the spread between the different armies here. Again though, can't really stress enough how these aren't really the ones to focus on. I know people are interested in them, but maybe give us a nudge as to how to adjust thinking about the armies as opposed to actually telling the proper story. Before we take a look at total win rates and all the rest, I'll just give a quick shout out to today's video sponsor and ObjectiveMarkers.com, makers of some faction specific Warhammer 40k gaming accessories. As the name would suggest, these objective markers that you can see on screen now. These things are fairly common 40k accessories, the idea being that you have a 40mm central objective marker drawn as a circle on a clear silicon disc, and then the edge of the disc is 3 inches beyond that, so you can basically super easily see whether or not you've got infantry on an objective or if they're just off it. The clear silicon design that these guys have is quite a fun one. It means that you can see the battlefield through the marker, and perhaps detracts a little bit less visually than some, while also adding a little bit of faction flair, themes based on your army. They've got a whole bunch of different designs. They've got the channel merch Auspex design, aimed to be scanning the centre of the battlefield. Any sales of that one help to support the channel a little. Otherwise though, most of the rest is faction specific. An Astral Military one could be nice enough for guard players. And then they've got others for your Golden Guardians, Space Worms and Power Armoured Warriors. And there's one for Chaos, Greenskins and other Alien Xenos as well, with more designs on the way. They deliver to the UK and ship to several locations around the world. Depending on location, they have some free shipping on larger orders as well. In any case, a big thank you to them for sponsoring this one. You can check them out, linked in the video description if you'd like to. Getting back to the 40k army performance though, slotting those numbers alongside the last 2 weeks of data, and this is what we get. And it looks like the lower third of 40k armies are actually not doing too badly by the numbers. Seems that all the stuff that was 45% or lower did well in the past week, looking like it's putting the armies that were performing worst around the 46 and 47% mark, which is kind of unusually good as per 40k's history goes. Here we've got the Emperor's Children, Tyranids and Imperial Agents, and then just above them we've got Thousand Sons, Space Marines, Space Wolves and Guard. Drukhari also dropped down a bit to 48%, having had a bad week, and Chaos Space Marines are here too. Then for the middle third, absolutely loads of armies around the sort of 50% kind of mark. Most of these haven't had any particularly big shifts here. Looks like the Death Guard remain on 51%, and the Genestealer Cult is still maintaining a 49%, despite the big nerfs that they had recently. Orcs climbed up a little too, but really does imply that there's a lot of armies in Warhammer 40k that are in with a fighting chance. Then for the slightly stronger end of the spectrum, there's a few armies just above that with Black Templars, Custodies, Tau World Eaters and Grey Knights, and then getting most stand out, we've got the overall winners since the dead slate being the Admech and Deathwatch, both on 58%, Admech with a fair bit more data than the Deathwatch have though, and then Aeldari and Sisters of Battle just after that. Overall seems like pretty solid numbers in terms of 40k game balance compared with what we've often had in the past. Here's what that looks like all put together in a graph. At least so far, the weakest armies in the game not being notably weaker than the rest of the field, even if obviously it does seem that they're having more trouble winning games than some at the very top of the roster. Sisters Aeldari, Admech and Deathwatch seemingly. Another metric for army success are the top performers at tournaments, and it sort of depends on what sort of thing you're trying to measure in terms of army strength. Win rates generally help with the average performance for the average player, but if you're looking to win grand tournaments, then probably the top performers are the more relevant data, as the game's played on a very different sort of level at the top tables of the Las Vegas Open or London Grand Tournaments. The metric I like to use for this one are armies that went the first 5 games undefeated in any Grand Tournament, as that'll include the vast majority of Grand Tournament winners, but also capture all the players that went to really big tournaments and basically put in a performance that would have won them a GT elsewhere, but then played a very good player game 6 or 7 or something. For those armies this week, it looks like it was the Tau Empire and the Space Marines that had the most performances, both of which with quite a mix of different detachments there. Interestingly, the Space Marines weren't quite so dominated by the Raven Guard Shadowmark Talon. There were quite a few Ultramarines lists with an Ironstorm and 2 Storm Lancers. Beyond that, there were loads of armies that had 2 or more performances like this. Aeldari had 4, Blood Angels, Admech, Necrons, Chaos Knights and Chaos Demons had 3. I've listed the detachments that they won with here. Then there were 2 for Chaos Marines, Templars, Sisters and World Eaters. And a bunch more factions just had the one big performance, including the Astra Militarum and Deathwatch lists that duked it out in the final for the Las Vegas Open. Adding those into the overall numbers for the armies that are making the top tables the most, there's definitely a lot of factions that seem to be far more prevalent in having success at this high level. We've got Admech, Aeldari, Space Marines, Chaos Knights and Blood Angels on the first 5, with Tau Sisters and Necrons following after that. On the other hand, there's a bunch of factions that really haven't had too many tournament places since the balance pass. Space Wolves, Thousand Sons, Orcs, Imperial Agents and Genestealer Cult, either just having the one big performance like this or none. The amount of armies winning there does also account on play rate a bit. If you have more people turning up with one faction, then they are likely to have more top placings just due to randomness, even if they were just as strong as everything else. So to account for that, here's a version of the same thing but weighted per play rate. which certainly shifts things up a bit, particularly for the lesser played factions like Deathwatch or Drukhari, which actually jump into first and second place for kind of niche factions that are often just played by some very skilled players. Here's that data represented in a graph. Admech still on top here. It looks like they're winning 40k by just about every metric at the moment. Again, they're an army that don't really have that many people playing them, but the ones that do seem to be both winning loads of games and also seem to be taking top spots at tournaments. Then there's Deathwatch and Drukhari, Chaos Knights, Sisters and Aeldari after that. Plenty of other armies doing solidly well. It does make armies like Space Marines look particularly mid from these sort of stats, just as there's so many people playing the faction that you'd expect a lot of people to be making the top tables just if it was random. Though notably World Eaters, for the sheer amount of people playing them, really haven't been having so many top spots on tournament placings at all. Looks like they had a bunch of these high placings 3 weeks ago, and then just the one this week. Finally, for main data things, looking at top level Warhammer 40k, I thought it would be interesting to take a look at the detachments. This one's not from my own data, so credits to Stats Hubber for this one. I'll link them down in the video description below. They're really quite a cool stat site that you can see a whole bunch of things from. At time of recording, they haven't updated the data for the past weekend's results, so this is just the first 2 weekends after the balance update. And even more so than armies, there's going to be less data here just due to not every person who plays an army plays one detachment, or at least for a lot of them. And some of these can be a bit artificially exaggerated. Say if one detachment only really tends to get plays by top tournament types and no one else. In any case though, for detachments that have at least 100 games on record, again it's the Admech winning once again. Skitarii Hunter cohort having a better performance so far than the Halo Screed Battleclade, but that's also on the list at 54%. I'd bear in mind that Halo Screed Battleclade is played by a fair few more people though, so has more reliable data and more people think that they're going to have a better chance with it than Hunter cohorts. Otherwise it seems that we've got the Tau Auxiliary Cadre also on 60%, which is interesting enough. Maybe a little bit of a surprising one there, nosing into second. I suspect that that's a bit of an element of chance really versus the other Tau detachments. Tau in general are doing well of course. We've got the two Sisters detachments that are most popular in the Champions of Faith and the Hallowed Martyrs, both here as well. More people actually seem to win events with the Hallowed Martyrs versus the Champions though. The Aeldari Aspect Host and War Host are both here on 4 and 5, both played in good numbers and having some good success at every level. There's the Grey Knight Warpbane Task Force on 54%, outperforming the Banishers. The Space Marine Stormlance Task Force, which I believe includes data for Space Wolves and Dark Angels too. I feel like that's often one that tends to get used more by top level players than the average player who might go for Gladius perhaps. There's also Mortarian's Hammer for the Death Guard too. Interesting to see an early look at that, though I would expect that they'll probably shift around a bit as we get more data. Finally, let's quickly round up a few more of the top undefeated lists from over the weekend. I talked about the ones from the Las Vegas Open in the dedicated video for that, so let's take a look at some others. There was a Chaos Demons Demon Incursion one by Jake Chalmers that took first at the Edmonton Open. That was 5-0 at a 100-player tournament. Demons still seem to be in the sort of solid upper mid sort of area, though are declining in terms of the numbers of players. Demon Incursion does tend to be the one that they go for the most, having warp rifts to teleport them around and do close charges. This one doesn't go quite as heavy on the greater demons as most do. 2 great unclean ones and Rotagus, which is still very intimidating. A massive amount of stats to try and take down there. But then there's some fun damage support from a bunch of more regular sized demons. 2 big units of Blood Crushers, which seem like a good target for close deep strike for 1 command point. A Red Master on a Blood Throne to make their damage just go absolutely nuts when they're on the charge there. 6 Screamers, which are quite a nice interference fast units that can hit with quite a bite against both elite infantry and tough stuff. A squad of 6 Flamers, looking like they're with the Exalted Flamer there. A good utility unit, good for the close deep strike and maybe Overwatch potentially. And then some objective support with some Plague Bearers and Beasts of Nurgle. Nice to see a bit more of a balance between the Monster Mash demons and the more regular sized ones. Next up and winning the other 100 plus player tournament was this one by Travis King, Aeldari Warhost winning the Michigan GT. Warhost also did very well at the Las Vegas Open, with Folder Piles' list as well. Aeldari have still been doing very well by just about every metric, loads of event wins and good win rates. Warhost amps up their battle focus things, so gives you more tokens and buffs the movement, has lots of classic Aeldari shenanigans, and still does the jumping in and out of Wave Serpent trick that they have with Fire Dragons, with not 1 but 2 different units here. One led by Fugan, meaning that you've got enormous hammers of damage that can then retreat to safety after they've struck. Beyond that, most of the rest is pretty staple stuff for the Eldar. Eldrad Ulthram with a unit of Storm Guardians to farm command points and sticky objective the home field. Jane Zar and Lycus alongside a squad of their Aspect Warriors to rush forward very fast and take stuff out. 3 more units of Swooping Hawks and 2 sets of Warp Spiders that can do a good mix of utility and deal with lighter infantry. And then some Rangers and Void Reavers for a couple of more expendable units. That tournament was quite a big one, and it looks like it only went to 5 rounds, so there were a few undefeated lists. Another one was this Templar Gladius by Conan Jennings. It's got 4 terrifying damage dealer units, 3 sets of Castellan, Marshal, and 5 Sword Brethren, doing the big damage combo where you can lethal hits on a 5+, and then reroll everything that isn't a 5+ if you have a mind to. It should be able to wipe out the vast majority of normal sized targets in the game. And then a very fighty Emperor's Champion with the Honor Vehement, and he's joining a unit of Assault Intercessors for the rerolls. Looks like they'll be jumping out of Templar Impulsors, or maybe using the devastatingly shooty Templar Repulsor Executioners to stage out of. They get the big rerolls against things that are near your own units, plus a bonus multi-melter. And then there's 5 more small unit Space Marine squads, plus a Combi Lieutenant to help out with the objective game, Infiltrate, Sticky Objective, Deep Strike, and all that good stuff. Next up, World Eaters might be being played a whole load, but not too many people have managed to take them towards the tops of tournaments. This list by Brian Doherty of the Red Path placed 3rd at the Michigan Grand Tournament though, taking a pretty balanced looking World Eaters list, not going too heavy on any one thing, and going both for Demon Prince and 2 Forge Fiends as well, where a fair few people have been dropping one or both of those for greater numbers of Khorne Berserkers or 8-bound. Those are still absolutely strong units though. The Demon Prince with the helm and the discounted command points, Forge Fiends with their triple ectoplasma rapid firing. There's still 2 units of Khorne Berserkers here, one led by Khan the Betrayer and jumping out of a Rhino. I don't know if the other one has the Juggernaut Lord in, or if he's running around solo with the favourite of Khorne. There's 2 sets of 8-bound, 1 regular and 1 exalted. One of them will be led by the Slaughterbound with the Berserker Glaive, who's just fantastically fighty for the points cost. There's 2 sets of Jackals for sticky objectives, and 3 sets of the 2 Chaos Spawn. Excellent, very fast moving, scouting, skirmishing and trading units. Looks like a great example of competitive World Eaters. Then finally for our look at top list, we've got the Chaos Space Marines. This was another Veterans of the Long War list. 1 week after that detachment was used to win the London Grand Tournament once again. This one used by Trey Burnett to take first at the Denver Fight Club Open, going 6-0. Veterans of the Long War gives you 4 rerolls against 1 target, plus a really powerful reactive move and some other stuff. This one does have a few similarities with Liam VSL's list, though swaps out plenty of things for some other Chaos staples. There are 2 Obliterators here with their big firepower and shooting out of line of sight once per game, which could work well with the focus of hatred. There's a big Chosen block led by Fabius Bile, a Chaos Lord with a hammer with some Legionaries to give him rerolls for damage. There's a Lord Discordant in this one, quite nice stats and really quite fast. Cypher and a few smaller units for skirmishing around objectives, and a solid firebase with 2 Predator Destructors and a Predator Annihilator. Overall looks like a pretty well balanced and scary one. Lots of big damage dealers backed up by good objective support. In any case though, let me know what you make of the latest 40k tournament stats and armies that have been doing well. I look forward to hearing your thoughts down in the comments below. As mentioned, thank you to ObjectiveMarkers.com for sponsoring this one. Feel free to check them out, links down in the video description below. They've got a fair few designs that could work for different 40k factions out there. I'll leave that there for now though. Feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics if you'd like to see more like this. I'll certainly keep the regular 40k videos coming with new ones out just about every day. Finally, if you've been enjoying the videos on the channel and want to help keep them coming, I would just like to mention that Auspex Tactics does have a Patreon page as well, and you can find that linked in the video description below. Channel patrons get a fair few advantages, seeing certain videos early, regular votes to see what sort of things come next on the channel, and automatic entry into the regular prize giveaways with the chance to win some big model kits each month. If any of that sounds good to you, or you'd just like to help support, the link's down in the video description. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.